You can now order a Disturbing plush. The link will be in the description and pinned in the comments. These are limited edition, so hurry and get yours while you still can. In May of 1933, thousands of Soviet prisoners were exiled to a Siberian island, known as Nazino Island. The prisoners, without any tools, supplies or knowledge, were told to settle on the island and set up a new type of Gulag, one where the prisoners would grow crops for the state. It didn't take long for this plan to fall apart, with thousands dying not just of exposure to the cold or disease, but at the hands of the other captives. Many of the prisoners were murdered as a food source for the others. In today's video, we will cover just why so many were sent to such a place, what happened to those unfortunate enough to end up on Cannibal Island, and what, if anything, was learned from one of the darkest chapters of Soviet history. By 1929, Joseph Stalin decreed one of his most infamous policies, collectivization. The goal was to bring agricultural production under the control of the state, and away from individual farmers and landowners. Property, produce, and land was seized, and collective state-run farms were formed. Kulaks, that is the richer, more successful farmers and landowners, were dehumanized. The project devastated the regions of Ukraine and Kazakhstan, resulting in the famines of the Holodomor, which was the first video on our channel. But what is important for this video is that there were thousands of people who opposed collectivization, and as a result were arrested and sent to Gulag work camps. And despite this, there were still shortages in food. In March of 1933, Genrikh Yagoda devised a solution to both of these problems. Rather than sending these farmers and agricultural workers to toil hard labor in the gulags, why not set up prison camps where food could be grown? The resettlement plan was put into motion, even before official approval from Stalin and the Politburo, as thousands were rounded up and arrested. Whilst some for this project would be from the farms, many more were taken from the cities. Arrest quarters were padded out with almost everyone the police could get their hands on. Loyal party members who did not have their paperwork to hand, wives of workers who had received multiple commendations for their output, and even children were arrested on the loosest of crimes. All were exiled to Siberia. As the first few thousand prisoners arrived, the Soviet officials running the region were shocked. They were not informed of the sudden influx of prisoners, nor were they equipped to deal with such numbers. The supplies that were brought, if any at all, were inadequate, and yet the plan was to continue. The first few thousand prisoners were loaded onto barges and sent down to the river Ob, eventually arriving at Nazino Island. Around 30 of the prisoners would die on this route. Whilst aboard the barge, prisoners would subsist on around 7 ounces of bread a day, prepared by the 50 or so guards that accompanied them. Around 5,000 prisoners made up the first batches sent to the island, comprising of mainly city dwellers, political prisoners, and the odd hardened career criminal. Upon arriving at Nazino Island, the prisoners were greeted with a grim sight. The island had few trees, but was a marshy, frozen swamp some 3 kilometers long and around 600 meters wide. They were left with no tools, no shelter, and no real food. Most of the prisoners still wore the same clothes that they had been arrested in. There was little the prisoners could do but wander the island in search of bark or moss, anything that could serve as food. Many would die from hunger, the below freezing conditions, or from exhaustion. Others would die at the hands or the rifle butts of the guards. Those who were not beaten to death would be shot at by the guards as sport. The guards would remain in relative comfort aboard the barges. By night, many would die of exposure or would burn to death by laying too close to the campfires. On the first night alone, some 300 people died. On the 4th day, the guards doled out flour to the prisoners, who were now unwilling at this point to make any more bread for them. Panic soon set in as prisoners rushed to mix the flour with the infested water available, many succumbing to dysentery. The only other food available would be the occasional scrap thrown onto the island by the guards, where the starving masses would scramble to get what they could. As the plight for food grew ever dire, guards would offer some of their own rations in exchange for sexual favors from the girls and women. A few days after this delivery of flour, riots broke out across the island, as the prisoners united against the inhumane treatment. This time, when the food was delivered to the prisoners, the guards devised a way to fragment any common cause the prisoners might have. The flour was not given to individuals, rather to groups of prisoners, and for them to distribute amongst themselves. Amongst these groups, the unscrupulous or the criminal element tended to take charge, with an unequal division of food. Gangs started to form who would inflict violence to the other prisoners as they extorted what little food was available. One cruel example would be where prisoners with gold teeth were attacked. Their gold teeth would be pulled out and bartered away with the guards in exchange for food. By the 10th day, a number of the prisoners resorted to cannibalism, in the bid to survive the horrific conditions. It was the prison camp doctor who first noticed the telltale signs of cannibalism. Dead bodies were missing limbs and chunks of flesh. When he reported this to his superiors, he was ordered to ignore it. In one grim instance of cannibalism, a prisoner who had developed a relationship with a guard was attacked whilst the guard was away. It was reported by one witness the following: "They caught the girl, tied her to a tree, cut off her breasts, her muscles, anything they could eat, everything. They were hungry, they had to eat. When the guard came back, she was still alive. He tried to save her, but she had lost too much blood." Though, according to one of the surviving prisoners who engaged in cannibalism, some did not eat human flesh. One account goes as follows: "I only ate livers and hearts. It was very simple, just like shashlik. We made skewers from willow branches, cut the flesh into pieces, stuck it on the skewers, and roasted it over the campfire. I picked those who were not quite living, but not yet quite dead. It was obvious that they were about to go, that in a day or two they'd give up. So it was easier for them that way. Now, quickly, without suffering for another 2 or 3 days. These are but two of the accounts of those who survived or witnessed what took place on Nazino Island. There are plenty more out there, and no doubt many more lost accounts. By the end of May, a further 1,000 prisoners were dumped onto the island, again arriving with nothing but the clothes on their back. They arrived on an island of madness, where cannibalism was commonplace, where gangs roamed and killed anyone with a scrap of food, whilst guards exploited the horror for their benefit of perverse enjoyment. 1 month after the first barges arrived, the camp was closed, proving to be a huge failure. Of the 6,700 prisoners who arrived, only 2,200 managed to survive. The corpses of the rest littered the island, and had filled the stomachs of those who survived. This may well have been the end of the matter, the Soviet authorities merely sweeping the failure under the rug. If not for the Soviet official, Vasily Velichko, the matter may not have been as well reported. He had heard rumors of the horrors that had occurred at Nazino from the locals, and was eager to investigate. Velichko was a local level official who was instructed to report on another collective farm in the area. Instead, he heard rumors of what had happened at Nazino and took matters into his own hands. When he arrived in August, the summer grass on the island obscured his view from the shoreline. Once on the island though, he found the countless bodies left rotting, and uncovered more than 30 mass graves. Velichko gathered witness statements and compiled his report, sending it to Moscow. The report was reviewed and attempts were made to cover up the matter further. The report was buried in the Soviet archives, but was fortunately read by the right people. The resettlement program was declared a failure and brought to a swift end. Instead, focus was placed on forced labor camps. All 50 guards of the island were jailed, but only for 12 months and in better prisons. A number of prisoners were sentenced to death for looting, assault, and cannibalism. Of the remaining surviving prisoners, less than 300 were deemed able to continue work in the Gulag system. The rest, badly damaged by their experiences. Velichko was fired from his job, but no further punishments were leveled against him. He would go on to become a war correspondent during the Second World War, and wrote on the socialist development of Siberia, but never wrote about what he uncovered on Nazino Island. It was not until the end of the Soviet Union, along with pressure from the locals, that the report would finally be released to the public in 1994. Some of the witnesses to the horrors lived to see the memorial placed on the island in 1993. To this day, flowers are laid at the memorial each June to mark those who lost their lives in the most nightmarish of scenarios. Many of you will no doubt be aware of the large numbers of people who suffered under Stalinist rule. The horrors of Cannibal Island are but one page in crimes of the Soviet Union, but are deeply shocking. The cruelty of the guards, the hopelessness of the situation, and the absence of any human drive save for survival at any cost are hard to stomach. Cannibalism to the extent as it was carried out at Nazino is seldom seen, and speaks to pure desperation. One cannot begin to imagine the horrors that took place during those few weeks that will remain in infamy for years to come.